The Garden Under Moonlight. Chapter 1, Moonlit Pathway. I didn't know when I first noticed the soft glow spilling through my window, but once I did, it felt impossible to look away. It wasn't the usual light of the moon I'd known all my life. It felt gentler somehow, as if someone had draped silk across the sky and let it slip through the quiet night. There was no sound to it, no rustle of leaves or hum of distant traffic, only the steady hush of my own breath and the way the light seemed to hum in my chest. I stood by the window for a long time, my fingers resting on the sill, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. The garden outside, the one I thought I knew so well, seemed different under this strange, silvery wash. The grass looked softer, the edges of the stones rounder, the old fence half forgotten under climbing vines that weren't there yesterday, or maybe they were, but I hadn't seen them before. I had the oddest sense that if I stepped outside, I might not come back the same. So I did. Barefoot, I opened the door and let the night wrap itself around my ankles. The air tasted like lavender and something sweeter I couldn't name, something like rain even though the sky was clear. The path that wound through my garden seemed to have shifted slightly, curving toward the back gate in a way I didn't remember. Or maybe I'd never really looked at it before. I took my first step onto the stones, feeling them cold and smooth beneath my feet. The night didn't push back, it welcomed me instead, each breath deepening the hush inside my mind. I could almost hear my own thoughts settling, like dust drifting to the floor of an empty room. I walked, one foot in front of the other, past the rose bushes that smelled stronger now, past the wooden bench where I'd left a book days ago, though now it was gone, replaced by a single white flower resting on the seat. I bent down and touched it. Its petals glowed faintly, as if holding the moon's breath. I tucked it behind my ear without thinking. The back gate stood slightly ajar. I don't remember leaving it that way. When I touched it, it swung open without a sound. Beyond was not my neighbor's yard, but a narrow path lined with stones, so pale they seemed to drink in the light and spill it back out around my feet. I stepped through. Behind me, the gate closed itself with a whisper, but I didn't look back. Ahead, the path curved gently, disappearing into a haze of silver mist that clung to the ground like drifting silk. I wondered if I'd ever walked here before in a dream, if this place had always waited behind my garden fence. I moved slowly, each step lighter than the last. The mist brushed my calves like a stream of air. It smelled faintly of mint and something older, like pages of a book that had sat unopened for decades. As I walked, small shapes appeared along the path. First, a patch of wildflowers I'd never seen, tiny blue petals that caught the light and scattered it like stars. Then a small pool, clear as glass, reflecting the pale orb above. I knelt beside it, trailing a finger through the water. It was warmer than I expected, and when I lifted my hand, tiny droplets clung to my skin, shimmering like little moons. I wondered where this path would take me. But for once, the wondering didn't feel heavy. It drifted through my mind like a feather on a breeze. I rose and kept walking. Further on, the path widened. Trees emerged from the mist, tall, slender trunks with leaves like silver coins. When the wind stirred, they didn't rustle. Instead, they seemed to sigh, a sound so soft it might have been my own breath echoing back at me. I paused under one of those trees and leaned my forehead against the bark. It felt warm, almost alive. If I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine it breathing with me, slow, calm, patient. When I opened them again, the branches above had shifted, revealing a stretch of the sky that looked deeper, darker, full of distant pinpricks of light. I stood there for a long while, listening to nothing but the steady beat of my heart and the whisper of the leaves. When I finally stepped away, I felt lighter, as if something small and unnecessary had been left behind, folded into the roots of the tree. The path kept calling me forward. I followed. I don't know how far I walked. Time had a way of losing itself here. The mist seemed to thin and deepen all at once, parting to reveal glimpses of shapes that didn't quite make sense, an archway woven from branches, a stone with strange carvings that seemed to shift when I blinked, a lamp that flickered softly with no flame at all. I touched each thing gently, as if afraid they might vanish at my fingertips. But they stayed, as real as my own breath. Finally, the path curved one last time and opened into a clearing. There, under the full gaze of the moon, stood a garden unlike any I'd ever seen. The flowers were unfamiliar, blooms that seemed to breathe in the moonlight and release it in soft pulses, like the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat. The ground was soft underfoot, mossy and warm, and the air smelled of honeysuckle and something sweetly unfamiliar. I stepped into the center and turned slowly, letting my eyes drink it in. Here, everything felt both new and known, like a half-remembered lullaby. I sat down on a patch of moss and let my hands rest in my lap. Above, the moon watched, patient and round. I felt its light on my skin, a hush that wrapped around my shoulders. I breathed in. I breathed out. The garden held me gently, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no need to move, no need to speak. I closed my eyes, listening to the silent chorus of flowers and leaves and distant stars. Somewhere inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The path would go on. And I would follow, step by slow step, deeper into this garden under moonlight. Chapter 2: The Whispering Pond. When I opened my eyes again, the moon had drifted slightly across the sky, as if time had slipped past while I rested among the soft moss and gentle flowers. I could still feel the weight of its light on my skin, a warmth that settled deep into my chest like a memory I hadn't made yet. I shifted my hands in my lap and felt the petals of a fallen flower brush my palm. It made no sound, but I imagined it sighing as it touched my skin. I stood slowly, careful not to disturb the patch of moss that had held me so patiently. Around me, the garden breathed, a slow, silent pulse that matched the quiet hush inside my mind. Somewhere beyond the circle of silver blooms, I heard a new sound, the faintest trickle of water, steady and sure. It called to me without words, the way the path had called me from my garden gate. I stepped carefully between clusters of glowing flowers, my bare feet sinking slightly into the soft earth. The ground seemed warmer here, as if the garden itself had a heartbeat beneath the soil. The sound of water grew clearer with each step, a gentle flow, not rushing or urgent, but content in its own endless journey. The trees here were taller, their trunks pale and smooth like bone polished by rain. Their branches arched overhead, weaving together to make a canopy that let the moonlight filter through in shifting patterns. I watched the light dance on my arms, tiny ripples of silver that reminded me of the pond I'd seen earlier on the path. But this was different. Deeper. Closer. When I reached the source of the sound, I found a small pond nestled among a ring of stones. Its surface was so still it looked like a mirror laid flat on the earth. I knelt beside it, brushing my fingertips along the edge. The water shimmered under my touch, sending gentle ripples across the glassy surface. Each ripple caught the moonlight and bent it into soft shapes, circles, spirals, patterns I couldn't name but somehow recognized all the same. I leaned closer and looked down into the pond. At first, I saw only my own reflection, pale face, wide eyes, a single white flower still tucked behind my ear. But as the ripples spread and settled, my reflection faded, replaced by shapes that moved just beneath the water's surface. They weren't fish. They weren't shadows. They were something softer, like thoughts drifting through water, slipping away before I could hold them. I watched them dance and swirl, never quite touching the edges of the pond. They seemed to whisper to each other, though no sound reached my ears. Still, I felt the hum of their voices in my chest. I dipped my hand into the pond, and the shapes scattered like startled birds, only to return a moment later, circling my fingers. The water was warm, warmer than the air around me, and smooth as silk. I closed my eyes and let my hand drift, feeling the shapes brush my skin like gentle echoes. When I opened my eyes again, the pond had changed. The surface was clearer now, and deeper somehow. I could see all the way to the bottom, though there was no end, just a soft, endless blue that shimmered like the sky at dawn. It felt as if the pond went on forever, stretching down into some hidden part of the world I'd never seen. I sat back on my heels and let my hands rest in my lap, still damp and warm. The whispers from the pond curled around me like threads of mist. I couldn't make out words, but I didn't need to. The meaning lay in the hush between each whisper, in the way the water moved without moving, in the way the moonlight seemed to breathe through the branches overhead. I stayed there for a long time, listening to the quiet conversation between pond and sky. Sometimes I thought I heard my own voice among the whispers, soft and distant, speaking thoughts I hadn't formed yet. They slipped through me like water through my fingers, leaving behind only a sense of calm that settled deep in my bones. After a while, I dipped my hand into the pond once more. This time, when I lifted it, a single drop clung to my fingertip, shining brighter than the rest. I held it up to the moon and watched it catch the light, a tiny star balanced on my skin. I touched it to my forehead, and it vanished, leaving behind a warmth that spread through my mind like a slow exhale. I rose to my feet, feeling the moss between my toes. The pond settled back into stillness, the ripples fading until the surface was smooth once more. The whispers drifted into silence, but the hush remained, a steady presence behind my thoughts. I stepped away from the pond and looked back once, just once. Its surface reflected the moon in perfect clarity, so close I thought I could reach in and pull it free. But I didn't. Some things are meant to stay just out of reach, I think, so they can keep calling us forward. Beyond the pond, the garden opened into a new path, narrow, winding, lined with small white stones that glowed faintly under the moon's watchful gaze. I took a breath, tasting the night air that carried hints of mint and rain and something sweeter I still couldn't name. I stepped onto the path, leaving the whispering pond behind me. Its hush lingered in my mind, a soft promise that I carried with me into the quiet. As I walked, the world around me seemed to soften further. The trees leaned closer, their branches brushing my shoulders like gentle hands. Small flowers bloomed at the edges of the path, their petals curling open as I passed. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the earth itself lifted me forward. I thought of the pond's endless depth, the shapes drifting just out of reach, the whispers that needed no words. I wondered what lay ahead, what other secrets this garden held under its silver skin. But the wondering didn't press on me like a weight. It drifted through me like a breath, gentle and unhurried. The path curved and dipped, leading me deeper into the garden's heart. Somewhere ahead, I heard a faint rustle, not like the pond's whisper but something softer still, like the sigh of petals falling or the hush of distant rain. I followed it without question, each step slowing my thoughts until they felt as quiet as the pond's surface. I knew then that I would find something waiting for me. Not an answer, not a secret to keep, just another place to rest, to listen, to let the hush settle deeper into my bones. The garden would hold me, as it always had, as it always would. I walked on, wrapped in moonlight and the memory of the whispering pond, the night breathing around me like a promise kept. Chapter 3: The Lantern Grove. The path narrowed as I left the pond behind, winding gently between low bushes and small clusters of flowers that seemed to lean toward my feet as I passed. Their petals brushed against my ankles like soft sighs, each one leaving behind a fleeting trace of warmth that faded as soon as I stepped forward. The air grew cooler, but not unkind. It felt like the soft chill that settles just before dawn, a reminder that the night still held secrets yet to unfold. I drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling my shoulders loosen even more with each step. Around me, the garden seemed to lean closer, as if listening to my footsteps and answering with its own silent hush. As I rounded a gentle bend in the path, I saw the first flicker of light, small and distant, like a firefly suspended in the darkness. It hovered just above the ground, a pale golden glow that swayed slightly as if caught in an invisible breeze. I paused to watch it, half expecting it to dart away into the night. But it stayed, pulsing gently, almost as if it were breathing. Curious, I stepped closer. The light drifted back a little, leading me forward along the path. Soon, another appeared to its right, then another, until the darkness ahead shimmered with soft, floating lights that bobbed and swayed like lanterns held aloft by unseen hands. I followed them without hesitation, feeling the path slope downward into a shallow hollow. The earth here was softer, covered in a carpet of moss that muffled my footsteps until it seemed I was gliding rather than walking. The lights drifted ahead, guiding me deeper until the trees opened into a grove unlike anything I'd seen before. Lanterns hung from the branches, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one a tiny sphere of warm light encased in delicate glass. They dangled from slender cords that swayed gently in the hush of the grove, casting shifting patterns of gold and amber on the ground below. The trees themselves were tall and slender, their bark a pale silver that caught the lantern light and reflected it back in soft ripples. I stepped into the grove and stopped, turning slowly to take it all in. The lanterns made no sound, yet the air felt full of quiet voices, echoes of things I couldn't quite hear but felt all the same. It was as if the grove itself was humming a lullaby, a song meant only for those who found their way here. I reached up and brushed my fingertips against the nearest lantern. It swayed slightly under my touch, its glow flickering for a moment before settling back into its gentle pulse. The glass was warm, warmer than I expected, and as I drew my hand away, I felt that same warmth spread up my arm and settle in my chest. I wandered between the trees, letting my fingers trail along the lanterns that hung within reach. Some were larger, their glass etched with swirling patterns that caught the light in strange, shifting shapes. Others were no bigger than my palm, but their glow was just as steady, just as patient. In the center of the grove stood a single tree larger than the rest. Its branches stretched wide, heavy with lanterns that dripped from its limbs like drops of starlight caught in mid-fall. At its base lay a small, mossy clearing where the ground seemed to breathe in time with the lights above. I lowered myself onto the moss and lay back, feeling the softness cradle my spine. Above me, the lanterns swayed gently, their glow painting slow circles on the inside of my eyelids when I closed my eyes. The hush of the grove wrapped around me like a blanket, a quiet so deep it felt as if the whole world beyond the trees had vanished, leaving only this pool of warmth and light. I let my mind drift. Thoughts rose and fell like the lanterns overhead, bright for a moment before fading into the hush. I wondered who had hung these lights here, who tended them, who lit them night after night. But the wondering didn't press for an answer. It slipped away as easily as it came, leaving only a quiet curiosity that settled somewhere deep and safe. Time moved strangely in the grove. I might have lain there for moments or hours, I couldn't say. The lanterns didn't dim or brighten, they simply glowed, steady and sure, as if to remind me that not everything needed to change to feel alive. Eventually, I sat up, brushing stray bits of moss from my hair. I looked around at the lights that hung like 1,000 tiny moons and felt a soft hum of gratitude settle in my chest. I didn't know what I was thanking, perhaps the grove itself, or the silent hands that had placed these lanterns here. Or maybe I was simply thanking the hush for holding me so gently. When I rose to my feet, I noticed a small lantern sitting on the ground near the base of the great tree. Unlike the others, it wasn't hanging from a branch or a cord. It rested there, waiting, its glow softer and more golden than the rest. I bent down and lifted it carefully. It felt warm in my hands, not hot but alive, as if it contained a heartbeat that matched my own. Holding the lantern, I looked up at the canopy of lights. They seemed to sway in approval, their glow flickering slightly before settling back into their steady rhythm. I knew, without knowing how, that this lantern was meant for me to carry forward. Cradling it against my chest, I stepped back toward the edge of the grove. The moss gave way to the soft path once more, and the lights behind me seemed to lean closer, whispering a farewell I felt rather than heard. I didn't look back. The grove would always be there, its lanterns waiting for anyone who needed their hush. The path ahead curved gently, the trees growing thinner as I walked. The lantern in my hands glowed softly, casting just enough light to guide my steps without pushing back the night entirely. Its warmth seeped into my skin, quiet and calm, reminding me with each step that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I moved on, I let the hush of the grove settle in my mind, mingling with the whispers of the pond and the soft breath of the garden that had led me here. The lantern's glow pulsed gently against my palm, a small sun I could carry through the darkness. I didn't know where the path would lead next, but I didn't feel the need to hurry. I walked slowly, each step softer than the last, the night breathing with me as I drifted deeper into the garden under moonlight. Chapter 4: The Bridge of Petals. The lantern in my hands felt lighter as I walked, as if it floated just above my palms rather than resting in them. Its glow spilled through my fingers and danced on the path ahead, catching the edges of fallen leaves and tiny blossoms that drifted down from branches I couldn't quite see. The hush of the grove still lingered in my mind, a gentle hum that moved with me like a familiar shadow. The path curved softly to the right, where the trees gave way to an open space covered in low, flowering shrubs. Their blooms were pale and delicate, like cups of moonlight scattered across the ground. Each step stirred the petals, sending a faint sweetness into the cool air that filled my lungs and settled in my chest like a promise kept. I moved slowly, careful not to brush against the blossoms more than I had to. They seemed to bow slightly as I passed, tiny white and pink faces tilting in a silent greeting. Ahead, the faintest sound of water reached my ears, different from the hush of the pond or the trickle of distant streams. This was broader, deeper, like the gentle sigh of a river breathing under the moon's watch. I followed the sound until the garden opened wider, and there it was, a wide, slow-moving river that caught the lantern's light and scattered it across its surface in shifting ripples. The water looked as smooth as glass yet alive with soft currents that bent around half-hidden stones and drifting petals. At the river's edge, the path paused and gave way to a bridge, if it could be called that. It wasn't made of wood or stone but of countless blossoms woven together, petal to petal, forming a wide ribbon that arched gracefully over the gentle flow below. It looked impossibly fragile, yet something about the way it hovered, steady and sure, told me it would hold. I stood at the foot of the bridge, the lantern cradled close to my chest, and felt a warmth bloom behind my ribs. The petals rustled softly under some unseen breeze, though the night itself was still. Their whisper was not words but a hush so deep it felt like being rocked in a cradle of air and light. I stepped forward. The petals beneath my feet gave slightly, like stepping on the softest moss, but they held my weight without question. Each step released a faint fragrance, honeysuckle, jasmine, something sweeter I couldn't quite place but knew I'd smelled once in a half-remembered dream. The river flowed below, catching the glow of the lantern and scattering it in waves of gold and silver that bent around my reflection. I paused halfway across and looked down. My face looked softer here, blurred by the gentle ripple of the water and the drifting petals that floated like tiny boats on an endless sea. I knelt carefully, balancing the lantern on my knee, and dipped my free hand toward the river. My fingertips brushed the surface, sending out circles of light that merged with the current and drifted downstream. The water was cool, cleaner than any water I'd ever felt, carrying with it a hush that traveled up my arm and settled in my chest beside the lantern's warmth. I sat there for a while, letting the bridge hold me in its quiet cradle. The garden around me seemed to lean closer, as if the whole world had gathered just here to watch this moment unfold, petals drifting, water whispering, lantern glowing softly in my lap. When I rose again, I felt lighter, as if the river had carried something away on its slow journey to wherever rivers dream of going. I looked ahead and saw the far side of the bridge opening into another curve of the garden, darker at its edges but sprinkled with the same soft blossoms that had made this crossing possible. I walked the rest of the way slowly, each step sinking just slightly into the woven petals before they sprang back behind me, whole and unbroken. The hush of the river stayed with me even as the sound faded, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the steady breath of the garden's hidden heart. When I stepped off the bridge, the petals seemed to shimmer behind me, their gentle arc swaying once before settling back into perfect stillness. I didn't look back, I didn't need to. The river, the bridge, the drifting blossoms would be there if I ever needed to cross again. Ahead, the path wound between low hedges that glowed faintly under the lantern's light. I could see shapes nestled in the shadows, small blooms curled tight against the night air, stones stacked in quiet cairns, tiny lanterns like the one I carried resting on mossy ledges. Each seemed to breathe with me, a hush inside a hush. I let my free hand drift over the hedges as I passed. Their leaves were cool and damp with the soft dew that always comes when the world holds its breath just before dawn. The lantern warmed my other hand, its pulse steady, a heartbeat echoing my own. The path dipped once more, leading me into a small hollow where a single tree stood at its center. Its branches drooped low, heavy with blossoms that fell one by one onto the moss below, each petal landing without a sound. They gathered at the tree's base like a pale snowfall, drifting around roots that twisted into the earth like gentle threads. I sat at the tree's base and placed the lantern beside me. Its light spilled across the petals, turning their edges to gold. I gathered a handful and let them slip through my fingers, watching them settle back among their sisters in soft waves. I closed my eyes and felt the hush settle deeper. The bridge, the river, the grove, the pond, all of it wrapped around me here, gathered in this single place where the garden's heart seemed to rest. Above, the blossoms fell in slow motion, drifting down like dreams made visible. I tilted my head back and let one land on my forehead, its soft weight gone as soon as it arrived, leaving only a trace of coolness behind. I didn't wonder what lay beyond the next bend. I didn't wonder where the river led or how many bridges of petals might span its endless flow. I only knew that this garden would hold me, that its hush would cradle my thoughts until they floated away like petals on water. When I rose again, the lantern felt warmer in my hands. Its light seemed softer now, deeper somehow, as if it had learned a new kind of quiet from the bridge of petals and the river's hush. I stepped back onto the path, leaving the tree and its gentle snowfall behind. Ahead, the garden waited, patient, soft, breathing with me as I moved deeper into its dreaming heart. Chapter 5: The Silent Pavilion. The lantern's warmth guided me forward, its soft pulse a steady reminder that the hush I carried was not something I'd found and left behind but something that would follow me wherever I stepped. The path curled ahead in gentle arcs, the garden leaning close in places where the trees bent their branches low, like guardians bowing as I passed. I felt the brush of leaves on my shoulders, the whisper of petals drifting down to rest at my feet. Each step felt slower now, softer, as if the earth beneath the moss and stone had grown sleepy and was dreaming me forward at its own unhurried pace. Soon, the hedges parted to reveal an open space, a small clearing tucked deep within the garden's quiet heart. At its center stood a simple wooden pavilion, its beams pale under the moonlight, its roof gently sloped and edged with hanging vines that swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel. I stepped closer, my bare feet brushing against the soft moss that covered the clearing like a carpet laid down by patient hands. The lantern's light danced along the edges of the pavilion, catching the faint glimmer of dew on the wooden posts and the curling leaves overhead. Inside, the pavilion was empty but for a single low bench carved from pale wood. I stepped inside and felt the hush deepen, as if the pavilion had gathered the garden's quiet into itself and wrapped it here, waiting for me. I set the lantern down on the bench beside me and lowered myself onto the smooth wood. The hush settled over my shoulders like a blanket, warm and cool at the same time. I could hear the soft rustle of the vines overhead, the gentle breath of the night pressing against the pavilion's open sides. I closed my eyes for a moment and let my thoughts drift. They rose and fell like the petals on the bridge, like the lantern swaying in the grove, like the whispers in the pond's depths. Each thought surfaced, shone for a moment, then drifted away, leaving behind only the quiet hum of my own breath. When I opened my eyes again, the garden had shifted in the smallest of ways. Tiny lights glowed along the clearing's edge, small, round blossoms that opened in the lantern's glow. They shone with a soft white light, each one pulsing gently in time with the hush that filled the pavilion. I reached out and brushed my fingertips over the nearest bloom. Its petals were cool and smooth, and as I touched it, it seemed to sigh, a sound that wasn't a sound at all but a feeling, a settling in the bones, a loosening of something tight and forgotten. I leaned back against the bench and let my gaze drift upward. Through the open roof, the sky was a pool of silver, the moon drifting just beyond the web of vines. Stars blinked softly between the leaves, each one a quiet promise that there was always more to see, more to wonder about, more to hold gently and then let go. I thought of the garden that lay behind me, the gate I'd stepped through, the pond's whisper, the lantern grove, the bridge of petals drifting over the slow river. Each place had left something with me, small gifts I carried without weight, a hush here, a sigh there, a warmth that moved with me like a quiet heartbeat. In the pavilion's hush, all those pieces settled into one another, fitting together like stones in a circle. There was no rush to hold them all at once, no need to name them or shape them into something other than what they were. They simply were, parts of a quiet I'd stepped into and would carry with me even when the moon drifted behind the morning's first light. I sat there for what felt like hours or minutes, it didn't matter which. Time in the pavilion moved like the hush itself, soft, patient, unhurried. I felt my breath match its rhythm, slow and gentle, filling the space inside me that once had held noise and hurry and restless questions. The lantern flickered softly beside me, its light echoing the blooms along the clearing's edge. I could feel its warmth brushing my side, reminding me that this hush was not an end but a passage, a doorway I could step through as many times as I wished. When I finally rose, the night seemed to lean closer, listening. I lifted the lantern and held it to my chest, feeling its gentle heat seep into my hands, my arms, my heart. The pavilion watched in its quiet way, vines swaying above like a curtain drawn back to reveal a path waiting just beyond. I stepped out into the clearing, the moss springy beneath my feet, the circle of blooming lights nodding slightly as I passed. Ahead, the path wound away once more, curving gently between low hedges and the soft hum of unseen waters. I paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back at the pavilion. It stood there, waiting, a soft promise that I could return whenever I needed to sit in its hush and remember the quiet it had given me. Then I turned and stepped forward. The path curved like a question asked without urgency, and I carried the answer in my hands, glowing softly, warm as a memory whispered under the hush of a dreaming garden. I walked on, slower than before, each step softer than the last. The hush of the pavilion lingered in my mind like a breath I could hold forever, drifting through my thoughts and settling them gently like petals falling onto still water. Somewhere ahead, I could feel the garden opening again, unfolding one last secret for me to find. And I knew that when I found it, I would be ready to listen, not with my ears but with the hush that had grown so patient inside my chest. I followed the curve of the path, the lantern's glow brushing the moss and stones beneath my feet, my steps slowing to match the gentle breath of the garden's heart. Chapter 6: The Garden's Heart. The path ahead was narrower now, winding gently between low bushes that brushed my legs as I passed. The lantern in my hands felt warmer than ever, its soft glow spilling over my fingers and onto the earth, turning each step into a small circle of light. I could feel the hush I carried, collected from the pond, the grove, the bridge, the pavilion, settling deeper with every breath, like roots threading softly through the soil of my mind. Above, the moon drifted lower, its silver face framed by the high branches that arched overhead like a vaulted ceiling woven from leaves and moonlight. Now and then, a single petal drifted down and settled in my hair, weightless reminders that the garden was still awake, still watching, still holding me close. The path curved again and again, never sharp, never hurried. Each bend opened onto small clearings, tiny pockets of hush where the air felt thicker, the light softer. I passed a ring of stones half buried in moss, a cluster of flowers that glowed blue in the lantern's warmth, a single tree with branches so thin they seemed to float rather than grow. I felt no need to stop. Each sight felt like an echo of what I'd already found, reminders that the garden was not a single place but a weaving of many quiet places, each one breathing softly into the next. After a while, the path began to rise. The incline was gentle but steady, the earth firm under my feet yet so soft it barely remembered my steps. I could feel the hush deepen, the night folding itself closer around me as if the garden were gathering me into its arms for one last secret. At the crest of the small hill, the trees parted like curtains pulled back by invisible hands. Beyond lay a wide, open clearing bathed in the full gaze of the moon. The grass here was short and soft, sprinkled with tiny blossoms that shone like stars scattered across a green sky. In the very center stood a single stone, smooth and pale, worn down by 1,000 years of patient waiting. I stepped forward, the lantern's light spilling over the clearing, catching the edges of each tiny bloom and turning them to flickers of gold and silver. The hush here was so deep I could almost feel it on my skin, a soft, steady pressure that wrapped around my shoulders and pressed gently into my chest. I approached the stone and lowered myself to the grass beside it. I set the lantern down on its flat top, where it glowed steadily, its warmth spreading out like ripples across the hush. I placed my hand on the stone's cool surface and closed my eyes. Beneath my palm, I felt it, a slow, patient thrum like a heartbeat deep in the earth. It matched my own, though slower, older, a reminder that this place had been here long before me and would remain long after. I let my breath fall into rhythm with it, a steady give and take that loosened the last tight threads inside my thoughts. I sat there for a long while, listening not with my ears but with every part of myself. The stone's hush settled in my bones, drifted through my veins, rested in the quiet spaces behind my eyes. Above, the moon watched without judgment, its silver gaze soft and kind. I opened my eyes and let them drift over the clearing. The flowers leaned slightly toward the lantern, their petals brushing each other in slow motion greetings. Beyond the ring of grass, the trees waited, their branches swaying just enough to remind me that the world outside this hush still existed, just out of reach, just patient enough to wait. I looked at the lantern, its light steady and calm. It had carried me here, or perhaps I had carried it. Either way, we had arrived together at the garden's quiet heart. I lifted it once more and held it to my chest, feeling its warmth slip through the fabric of my shirt and settle against my skin. I rose to my feet and stepped slowly around the stone, tracing its edge with my fingertips. Each step felt softer than the last, my feet barely brushing the grass, my breath so slow it seemed the night itself was breathing for me. When I paused, I lowered the lantern to the ground at the stone's base. It glowed there like a small sun, its light pulsing gently in time with the heartbeat beneath the stone. I knew then that it no longer needed to travel with me. The hush I carried now glowed just as steadily inside my chest. I knelt and pressed my palms to the earth, feeling the soft give of moss and soil, the steady hum of roots that wound unseen below. I felt my thoughts drift downward too, settling into the hush that had waited here for me all along. For a moment, I thought of my garden gate, the path that curved away into the mist, the pond's whispered shapes, the lantern grove's patient sway, the bridge of drifting petals, the pavilion's quiet promise. Each piece rose and fell in my mind like lanterns on a breeze, never gone, never needing to be held tighter than this moment asked. I rose again, brushing stray petals from my hair. I looked once more at the lantern, its light flickering softly against the stone. I didn't feel the need to carry it back. I knew the hush would guide me home just as surely as it had brought me here. I turned toward the path that led back through the trees. The moon's light spilled ahead of me, pale and kind, wrapping the world in a hush so deep it felt like the last exhale of a dream. I stepped forward, barefoot and quiet, my thoughts drifting like petals on a slow river. I knew the garden would always be here. Whenever I needed it, when the world grew loud again, when my breath tangled with restless noise, I could return. I could follow the path through the gate, past the whispering pond, the lantern grove, the drifting bridge, the silent pavilion, all the way to this clearing where the garden's heart beat on and on. I stepped into the hush, each breath softer than the last, each thought lighter than the one before. The night folded around me like petals closing on a bloom. Somewhere beyond the trees, the first pale hint of dawn waited. But here, in this gentle place, the hush held me, and I let it.